Welcome to PRAJNA SPARKS Special Series 59 Days of Healing, where we explore one maxim from the Tibetan Lojong text, 7 points for healing dualistic mind, each day to integrate the practice into our lives. Today is day 30, the new moon. We are halfway through our 59 days of healing. Congratulations. I'm so glad you're taking this time to care for yourselves very well. Before you know it, we'll be ending this series and celebrating Losar, Tibetan New Year, on March 3rd. We are in the midst of point 6, Healing Promises. Maxim 30 reads, "Do not rely on righteousness." Righteousness is one of those words that I could spend all day talking about. There's definitely a very obvious sense of being right, maybe being just, maybe being in conformity with mores and standards of society or whatever it might be. But we all know what it's like when that righteousness veers into rigidity, when we become self-righteous. It's more than being righteous in the sense of being just and fighting for what is right. It's more digging in our heels, becoming very stubborn, and also a sense of feeling victimized by the lack of acknowledgement for our rightness in a particular situation. This is not a very helpful way to work with dualistic mind. As we've been talking about all throughout, dualistic mind thrives in atmospheres of categories, rigidity, and compartmentalizing. Self-righteousness is pretty much the theme song for dualistic mind. It's saying not only I'm right, but putting yourself on a pedestal, putting your belief, your idea, whatever it might be, on a pedestal, and being willing to harm even yourself for the sake of that idea. What this maxim is asking us to do is to soften. It's interesting because what it's saying is to soften our righteousness, not our self-righteousness. There's a built-in recognition that when we rely on, depend on righteousness, there's an immediate slippery slope into self-righteousness. In other words, relying on, counting on our righteousness hardens our dualistic thinking habit. That sense of self-righteousness, of being upright. You can hear in that word upright, there's a sense of being correct, but there's also a sense of being very rigid, brittle, ready to break. When we soften and warm up, the heart is able to breathe into attitudes such as benevolence, caring, delight, equanimity. These are the 4 immeasurables or divine abodes of Buddhism, which allow us to extend into our interconnection with beings in a way that is a lot warmer and more supple, not so brittle and ready to crack. These attitudes also allow us to feel into our vulnerability or woundedness or whatever may be happening. Usually self-righteousness is triggered by something that feels fearful or tender, and we are armoring ourselves. Allowing ourselves to occupy that wound is what actually lets some light and some warmth and understanding in, rather than the rigid confines of self-righteousness. This maxim is asking us not to be so sure that we're right. Let's say you are right, and everyone agrees with you. You still have to interface with the situation. If you're being self-righteous, it's usually in a reactive stance towards something. Even if you're 100% right, does it actually help you to be rigid about it, to be self-righteous? What this maxim is asking us to do is to soften and see, are there other ways of working with this situation, putting aside rigid categories of right and wrong, good and bad, and so forth.
I, too, could talk about righteousness all day. I do a lot of thinking about this and talking about it in my work on bridging the political divide, because people are not just feeling like they're right, but that self-righteousness, that rigidity, that armoring, oneself really comes to bear when you feel challenged in terms of your views, your identities, your values. I always make a distinction between righteousness and self-righteousness. So righteousness, when I've looked into, where this word comes from, it seems like there's a sense of being, some people talk about it in a religious sense of being right with God. And I think about it as also being right within your internal sense of integrity. And self-righteous is much more that piece you're talking about, that rigid feeling of digging in your heels, of frustration. Intellectual humility is a piece that can help someone to be righteous without being self-righteous, can help somebody to have even deeply held values without pushing other people's views away. And in fact, being curious about and interested in other ways of thinking about things. I also find that idea we've talked about sometimes of we're just seeing a slice of things. We have a slice of an understanding of what's going on, and other people have other slices. So interest in learning about ways that other people are thinking about things in other perspectives. With that distinction that I make between righteousness and self-righteousness, I always think, well, righteousness, that's about integrity. But one of the things I'm hearing you say here is that it's not just the self-righteousness that's a problem necessarily, but even that wanting to be more internally right, that sense of integrity. I guess it's a question I'm asking. Is that also problematic on some level?
That's a fantastic question because it gets right to the heart of the languaging here. I struggled with this one for years because of precisely the kind of dichotomy you're talking about. The Tibetan also refers to not relying on positive inner disposition. And if you look at different translations of these maxims, you will find so many different versions for this one because there is no one good way to say it. Let's use my don't rely structure. Some people will say, don't rely on being loyal. Don't rely on being predictable. Don't rely on consistency. Righteous is a slippery slope. Once you get on that hill, it's going to be very difficult to avoid slipping into self-righteousness. There's something about relying on an inner disposition which is positive, relying on righteousness, predictability, consistency, loyalty, that creates stagnation, rigidity, and even further reification. What ends up happening is that our righteousness, our loyalty, our predictability starts to gravitate around that center of self-importance. You don't have to put the self in before the righteous. It's already there.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's so interesting thinking about the idea that righteousness can be faulty in a way. And I mean, that's even getting at if you're too stuck on integrity, then that can be problematic because it's really sort of about the sense of self, like, oh, I have this very strong sense of integrity and I stick to it. And yeah, then I can see how even if it's not about judging other people for their lack of that integrity, even if it's kind of getting too stuck on your own sense of that, then that can be a problem. I was thinking about how, people always say, well, there's no I in team. And I'm like, well, there is an I in integrity. So maybe that's a way of thinking about it where any of these things need to be held with some sense of lightness and not clinging to it too much.
The reason I ended up using righteous here is because it's that sense of righteousness that converges around whatever good thing there is. Integrity, loyalty, predictability, solidity, whatever it is, holding it with too much tightness is what actually starts to take you down that slippery slope where you're waving the banner of whatever it may be. Faithfulness, loyalty, integrity, team member, whatever it is, but you're holding that flag with so much tightness that you cannot soften into the situation and actually be responsive. What this maxim is doing is pointing out that this sense of a self can subvert even the most positive of things. And it's asking us to be on the lookout to not let that habit take over and turn something that in and of itself is positive into something that becomes armor for yourself and a weapon for someone else, towards someone else.
This has been Yeshe and Tanya on day 30 of PRAJNA SPARKS special series, 59 Days of Healing. Tune in daily for more maxims from the Tibetan Lojong text, 7 Points for Healing Dualistic Mind. Check the episode notes for more resources, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at PRAJNA SPARKS, and email us at sparks@prajnafire.com with any questions. May all beings benefit.